In recent years, to develop sustainably, investment trends with environment, social, and good governance, or ESG, has increased significantly. To understand better on this topic, I would like to begin the second discussion panel on the future of ESG investing in ASEAN. For this session, please allow me to introduce our speakers for this panel. His Excellency Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, Prime Minister of Malaysia. Ms. Kani Wignaraja, UN Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific. Mr. Hugh Young, Managing Director, Asia Pacific Region, Aberdeen Standard Investments. Mr. Vincien Phongchatorn, Chairman of Premier Group of Companies. Ms. Shinta Wijaja Kamdani, CEO of Sintesha Group. Ms. Sujin Tang, Partner at Patamar Capital. For this panel, it is my honor to invite Mr. Christophe Bawe, UNDP Deputy Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific, to lead the second panel discussion. Mr. Bawe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zeong, and good morning to all participants. It's a great honor for me, on behalf of UNDP, to be moderating this panel session on the future of ESG investing in ASEAN, which is part of the ASEAN Business Investment Summit. By way of setting the context, let me just emphasize the fact that ASEAN countries are on the path of sustained economic growth. And even so, we are observing a contraction now, an economic contraction, a slowdown of the growth for the reasons we know related to COVID-19. The long-term trend for ASEAN remains one of growth and an enormous potential to be harnessed. At the same time, we also realize, possibly more acutely now, that this development pattern, this growth pattern, has laid bare a number of development issues, and that those have basically been accentuated over the last year. And those issues of development challenges relate to economy, environment, and governance. When it comes to government, to environment, it is really related to fossil fuel dominance in the energy sector. It's related to environment pollution, and more broadly about climate change adaptation and mitigation challenges. When it comes to a social side, it's a story also of inequalities that are now widening. It's a question also of lack of protection schemes for all citizens. And when we talk about governance, it has to do with corruption, transparency, and the need for strengthened legal framework. So ESG investing is very relevant in that context. And for UNDP, it is a theme of specific importance, because UNDP, as an organization, member of the United Nations, is very strongly committed to the Sustainable Development Goals, and within that to the role of the business sector. And we are working very much on fair business, fair based on business and human rights, and linked to that to the financing of the SDG, financing for development, which include innovative finance, green market, SDG bonds, and also ESG investing. So this is really a topic that is very relevant to UNDP, and I think to many of you, whether you're from the private or the public sector. I think the question we have in front of us is what happens in the post-COVID-19 moment, in the recovery moment. And we want to believe as UNDP that there has never been such an opportunity for the ASEAN society to become greener, to become fairer, and to become more resilient. And we hope very much that you all believe the same, but that also you're ready to take action for this, to make this belief a reality. The questions we are facing when it comes to ESG investing is really the level that needs to be increased, but also the impact that need to be strengthened. It's also the question of technology. How do we leverage technology to maximize the impact? And also, it's a question of imagination. If we do a leap in time, go to 2015, what do we want to see? And that's a blue sky exercise that we'll do later in this session. So this session is really about looking at those different dimensions of ESG investing in ASEAN. And to start and doing so, we're extremely honored to have a message from the Prime Minister of Malaysia, His Excellency Muhyiddin bin Mohammed Yassin, and we're going now to listen to him.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm indeed honored and pleased to be here today to share my thoughts on the digital ASEAN that is both sustainable and inclusive with all of you. The year 2020 presented us with possibly one of the harshest health and economic crises of our times. As we continue to mitigate and address the unprecedented challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, we find ourselves in a world that is significantly different from the one that we have become accustomed to all this while. This new world brings with it a new norm. And this goes beyond wearing masks, washing our hands, and maintaining social distancing. The nature of economic activities, the way in which businesses operate, and the manner in which we live and work are all evolving due to the COVID-19 crisis. In place of face-to-face meetings, we now have virtual ones. Instead of selling goods and services through a brick-and-mortar business entity, we now have online presence. And instead of a physical classroom setup, we now have students attending school through a virtual learning environment. These changes need to be supported by the right policy tools and, where necessary, government interventions. Bureaucrats and policymakers must respond with the right measures and prescriptions that are relevant in and responsive to a post-COVID-19 world. Around the world, the policy responses towards COVID-19 from an economic perspective have focused on returning workers to the employment market and minimizing disruptions to economic activities. The same is also true for ASEAN member states. Going forward, the logical next step is for us to explore the possibility of institutionalizing some of these responses so as to ensure that we have in place forward-looking measures and mechanisms that ensure the resilience of our economies as well as shield us from any future shocks and crises. These measures and mechanisms must also be sustainable and inclusive so as to ensure that every segment of our society is able to thrive and grow, not only by participating in economic activities, but also by living their lives to the fullest potential. So how do we, as governments, ensure that our people are able to lead prosperous and fulfilling lives? As a start, let us inform our policy decisions beyond a framework that is purely market-driven. And let us recognize that there is a real and immediate need for us to do this to ensure that the most vulnerable among us are also able to benefit from our pursuit of economic recovery and growth. It is within this context that I see the relevance of ESG, or environment, social, and governance investing. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the foundational philosophies behind ESG are also central to the key elements contained in the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and the United Nations 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. As a participant in these initiatives, Malaysia has consistently worked towards embedding ESG elements into our own domestic policy framework. For example, the ESG elements have been incorporated into Malaysia's Shared Prosperity Vision 2030, or the SPV 2030. Announced in October 2019, the vision aims to develop fair and equitable distribution of economic development at all levels by 2030. The SPB 2030 embodies good governance, transparency, and accountability, which is central to the ESG. In addition, the vision also recognizes the role of these elements in cultivating a stable and predictable economic environment, including a favorable investment climate. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my government remains committed in preserving a business-friendly environment in Malaysia. And to this end, we will continue to engage constructively with various stakeholders, including the business community, to better understand their needs, issues, and challenges. Admittedly, the COVID-19 crisis has had a devastating impact on all of us, and our business committee has not been spared. But if indeed there is a silver lining to this crisis, it is the fact that it has become an enabler of sorts, necessitating us to embrace technology and digitalization in a much more accelerated manner that we have earlier anticipated. It is said that change has many ways of manifesting itself. And I must say that through this crisis, businesses have been given an opportunity to embrace rather than resist change. For example, we now have a renewed sense of appreciation for technology adoption and digitalization as a matter of necessity and priority rather than an option. It will be interesting to see the role of technology adoptions and digitalization in the sectors that are essential to COVID-19 response, particularly medical, food, and agriculture. We're also likely to witness more e-commerce transactions and consequently a surge in e-marketplaces and related services, including logistics, warehousing, and e-wallets. With the right policy interventions and public-private partnership arrangements, e-commerce could be the solution for most businesses, particularly vulnerable groups such as MSMEs. In this vein, Malaysia will continue to develop our domestic readiness and improve all aspects of the e-commerce ecosystem, from the physical and digital infrastructures, governance, industry and market readiness, talent development, as well as other socio-economic integrated factors, which will bring benefit to all businesses, including MSMEs. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, signaling our commitment in incorporating ESG issues into investment practices, key institutional investment managers and asset owners such as Khazanah Nasional Berhad, Retirement Fund Incorporated, and Employees Provident Fund have also been listed as the signatories of the United Nations Principles of Responsible Investment. Since December 2014, the FTSE For Good Bursa Malaysia Index has encouraged companies to demonstrate strong ESG practices and greater disclosures through annual sustainability reports. In 2019, the Securities Commission, or the SC, developed the Sustainable and Responsible Investment SRI roadmap for the Malaysian capital market, charting the strategic directions to position Malaysia as a regional SRI center, which includes measures such as widening the range of SRI instruments and instilling strong internal governance culture. At the same time, the SC also formed a public-private partnership platform with the Central Bank of Malaysia to drive and coordinate the financial sector's collective response to managing exposures to climate risk and facilitating businesses to transition towards a low-carbon economy. Islamic financial institutions in Malaysia are also leading the way to generate more sustainable impact through the value-based intermediation flagship, which focuses on transforming the Islamic finance business. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, members of the public are becoming more conscious of the impact that businesses and investment have on the environment and society at large. It is therefore timely for ASEAN member states and businesses to adopt the ASEAN inclusive and responsible business investment principles, including those contained in the overarching ASEAN vision document, ASEAN 2025, Forging Ahead Together. I hope that this will lead to a more responsible investment culture, particularly in addressing ESG issues facing ASEAN member states, ranging from environment, climate change, labor standards to equitable economic development. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, although the COVID-19 crisis and the consequent economic disruption have had an adverse impact on all of us in ASEAN, let us see this as an opportunity to work hand in hand towards a more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient region, one that builds upon ESG element in business conduct and investment facilitation. On that note, I look forward to hearing your deliberations in advancing our ESG efforts and wish all of you a fruitful deliberation. Thank you.
For his message, and the Prime Minister has spoken to the very questions that we want to address during this session, whether it's ESG investing, but also the role of governments, the role of policies, the role of the private sector, including small and medium-sized enterprise in Malaysia, but also in ASEAN member states, and also the silver lining that COVID-19 can be if we use this as an opportunity. The Prime Minister, as you heard, also talked about the need for inclusion. As he put it, the need for all citizens to be living life to this fullest potential. And this is very much at the heart of the concept of human development, which is what the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, is standing for. And that's a perfect transition to our next speaker, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, the UNDP Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific, Ms. Kani Vignaraja, who is going to address us with a message.
Good morning to all participants at the ASEAN Business and Investment Summit 2020. It is a pleasure to be able to address you this morning on behalf of UNDP. Our appreciation to the hosts, the Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to His Excellency Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, Prime Minister of Malaysia, and the other distinguished panelists, and to the UK Prosperity Fund for their support in organizing this panel through our program on promoting a fair business environment in ASEAN. I wish to acknowledge and commend the government of Vietnam for their role as chair of ASEAN during an unprecedented year of uncertainty due to COVID-19. This year's ASEAN theme of a cohesive and responsive ASEAN captures the solidarity and agility needed to tackle shared challenges. A shock as cataclysmic as COVID asks all our leaders, whether in public or private sector, to stop and take stock of their decisions and policy and investment choices. Have they been the right ones that allowed a country or a company, an industry or a community to withstand the crisis and not just recover, but bounce forward? This is the conversation we are having today. While many ASEAN countries have been successful in dealing with the public health impacts of COVID-19, the aftershocks that have upended lives and livelihoods have expanded existing cracks, such as the growing wealth and income inequalities, high dependency on expensive fossil fuels, increasing levels of air and water pollution in our countries, poor waste management, and a breakdown in institutional accountability are some of these gaps that must be addressed. For too long, false dichotomies have driven decisions in the development business. Policies and financing were forced to support one side or the other. Rapid poverty reduction or sound environmental management, accelerated growth or addressing climate change, maximizing the economic value of forests, land, and water, or protecting biodiversity. These are false premises. Data and science debunked these myths. We are seeing the value of investing in sustainability across the environmental, social, and governance spheres. For today's leaders, the message is clear. Invest in the triple bottom line that regenerates the environment, cares for societal well-being, and promotes good governance. This is essential for a business to thrive today. And this is what the SDGs are all about. So as investors, producers, and consumers, and as leaders of government and business, it is not enough to be neutral. Public value is created by having an intentionally positive impact on the environment, on justice, and human rights. It is a marketplace that cares about and works within our planetary boundaries, so we do not destroy our natural resources, nor create further damage to our climate. For UNDP, this is an essential way forward. There is no other way, and we can see the shifts happening. Global interest and investment in ESG, and hence the Sustainable Development Goals, is growing rapidly. Young consumers and investors are transforming the landscape around transparency and citizens' ability to monitor what companies are doing for the planet and for people. They are demanding more sustainable policies and service choices from their governments and their leaders. In ASEAN, getting this right can put us back on track with the SDGs. Even if all countries are not able to meet all the goals given the COVID shock, if the policy and financing drivers change direction, they become well within reach. Thank you all.
We thank the Regional Director of for Asia and the Pacific of UNDP, Ms. Kandi Vignaraja, for her message, and it gives me now great pleasure to turn to the panel, and Ms. Thuy Zeung has introduced all the members, so let me not repeat that, but rather, on behalf of all of us, welcome them, starting with Mr. Hugh Yang. Good morning, Hugh. Are you with us? You might have a connection. All right. I see Ms. Tang Shuyin from Panama Capital. Good morning, Shuyin.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
We also have Kun Wichien Pongsathorn from Thailand. Good morning, Sawadee Krap, Kun Wichien.
Sawadee Krap, good morning.
Good morning. And I know that Ibu Shinta Kamdani from Indonesia is going to join us, but we should start with the first topic for discussion, which, as I mentioned earlier, is about increasing the level, but also the impact of ESG investing, and really trying to identify what needs to be done. And I'd like to turn to Kun Wichien first, because you know, with your perspective and your role in Thailand, what Kun Wichien do you think is still missing? What can be intensified? to increase the level and the impact of ESG investing in Thailand and in ASEAN member states?
Thank you very much. I think we have all heard from the various honorable speakers in previous sessions on the effect of the environment, the effect of the pandemic to our livelihood, and we are still in the middle of it. I would like to invite us all to look at this or treat this as a very big wake-up call, because we have had series of wake-up calls, and this pandemic is, of course, a very big wake-up call. We're in the middle of survival mode, and we are, of course, preparing for the recovery mode. And this must be inclusive. In order for us to recover, I think it is not reasonable for us to look at going back to business as usual to recover. I think we must learn from this wake-up call. We must learn from what has happened in terms of our environment, our various social challenges, and our governance shortfalls. So going back to business as usual is, of course, more than insufficient. So what I would like to invite participants to focus on is that ESG is so important to us. And substance is much more important than forms. So actions, serious actions must be taken. And what are the serious actions that we can take? First, we must look at opportunities to collaborate. Concerted effort is needed to forge serious positive change in the ESG ecosystem, which include, practitioners, business, all facets of the society, and of course the ESG investing and the investment community as a whole, to help us all move this forward, to turn around the negative in our worsened environment. Unending slides in climate changes, the lack of sufficient concerns in many social issues, health, nutrition, education, poverty, inequality, social injustices. And I would like to also emphasize the G element in the ESG, the governance, good governance, which has been lagging. And this is a big concern, I'm sure, to all of us in ASEAN. In my opinion, the shortfall in our governance observance has affected, of course, how we care about the environment, how we the attention that we should pay to the various social issues. So this is a cross-cutting element in the ESG endeavor that we're moving forward. So in order to do so, I mentioned collaboration and concerted effort. All parties must work together. Governments, businesses, civil society, academia. Most important of all, the general public must play their role. So in terms of the business, the private sector, what role do we need to play? What's in it for us? Why should we give more attention to ESG? So I must say that good society is good for business, because we have learned that what has happened to our environment, what the effect of the pandemic, the inequality issues, the shortfalls in resources and all have dampened the ability for business to grow and to perform sustainably. So this is very clearly in it for businesses, that business must play its part in ESG. And in order to do so, it must integrate ESG into their ways of doing businesses, as opposed to treating ESG as maybe a side effort on the part of their businesses. Good profit must be aligned with good environment, good society, and good governance practices. And trust is, of course, a very important element in running our business. Stakeholders must trust businesses. And if business practice ESG, the trust element can be strengthened. And of course, the investment community would welcome good performance, good profit from good businesses. So this is the logic behind why business should emphasize their efforts, should integrate and successes with ESG. So and I mentioned about the ecosystem and the collaboration. I don't think business can do this alone. I don't think the investment community can do this alone. I don't believe that the governments can do this on their own. I don't think the civil society can do this on their own. So collaboration and concerted effort, messages and initiatives must come from all parts, all sectors, and from the top down to the various practitioners. So this is what I have to say for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kap Kun Wichien. I'm very happy that both you and Shinta have been able to connect or reconnect. Before we turn to them, let me invite Shu Yin to share a few perspectives with us, partly because Shu Yin, you're a social investor. And social impact investment, we all realize, is different from ESG investing. But there could be no competition, but maybe complementarity. So can you please enlighten us about the differences between ESG investing and social impact investment? And maybe share also your views of what it takes to really increase the level and impact of ESG investing, which is the main topic for this session. Shu Yin, may I invite you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Christoph. It's a pleasure to be here. So as you pointed out, definitely there is a difference between impact investing and ESG investing. And I think for us, it's so encouraging to see increasingly thoughtful about how their investment portfolios affect people and the planet. However, even within this group, these do vary widely in terms of their approach and also their strengths. And it usually doesn't help compare them all records with stuff you mentioned. So, for example, the Impact Management Project, a global consortium of organizations for what was a global consensus on impact management standards, has suggested a number of different impact plots. So starting with action for great harm as an entry point, benefiting stakeholders in the middle, and then finally actively contributing. So just to make that a little more real, so for example, the negative screen ESG fund, the idea is to mitigate risk by avoiding investments into companies which score low on ESG criteria or are engaged in harmful activities. So this would fit into the avoiding harm class. A positively screened ESG fund looks for strong performance on ESG dimensions, and that would fit the benefiting stakes bucket. So impact investing, how is that different? So it takes things a step further and starts with a deliberate intent to generate a measurable positive social or environmental impact alongside natural. And, I think as you also alluded to, one approach isn't necessarily better than another, though it is critical to recognize these different approaches. So for us at Panama Capital, we are fitting into the actively contributing to plus category. We manage a number of different funds focused on ASEAN. Some of them have the goal of creating better executed for the MAP market and SMEs. And other funds are focused on women's economic empowerment and close gender gap. And advancing these goals is a core part of our investment thesis and strategy. So this is not a side effort or a check the box exercise. To illustrate, let me share an example. Our most recent investment out of our Panama Fund 2 is into an MSME lending platform in Vietnam called the Kiman Group. And as was highlighted by many speakers today, already micro SMEs are the backbone of the economy. And in Vietnam, they account for 98% of enterprise. So via its platform and more than 8 branches across the country, Kiman provides an end-to-end service, sales, underwriting, and collection to connect back financial companies to the MSME sector. So their customers are food, vegetable sellers, clothes kiosks, small retailers, and so on. And this company allows such MSMEs to access finance from the formal financial sector for the first time, rather than having to rely on informal credit where it changes 200 to 300%. And this is a great example of a company that provides measurable, intentional impact alongside an attractive financial risk. So looking ahead, and what it takes, I hope that the investment community really walks the talk when it comes to ESG and, impact investing substance. I think Vincent also mentioned that substance is very important here. This is very critical. And if it seems just like slick up, there is a risk of not just the particular fund manager or a company, but with the industry as a whole. And specifically, to avoid this, it's so important that fund manager clearly define what our impact and financial goals are for each fund or financial product.
Shuyin, can I just ask, can you speak, Shuyin? I think for the sake of translation, if you can speak a little bit louder and a little bit slower, would be excellent.
Sure. Okay. So as mentioned, it's important that each fund manager defines our impact and financial goals very clearly. And then, then we also need to report on these goals rigorously and regularly. So after decades of work, we now do have the tools to do this. And I understand it's not simple as a single IRR or ROI number, but there are now robust, generally accepted for measuring, managing, comparing, and communicating the impact of one portfolio. So the one that we use for this, IRIS Plus system, from the Global Impact Investing Network. And that is considered the industry standard for impact investing globally. Now, you still may be wondering, why does this? In the same way it's unacceptable for investors to make financial decisions based on gut feelings or best guesses, investors are concerned about the positive and negative impact of their investment need frameworks, metrics, and so for me, transparency and accountability around how the industry measures and communicates our impact results, as well as our learning, is very critical to driving the field. And thank you very much. I'll leave my initial remarks.
Thank you, Shuyin. And I think, you've covered the two questions. So thank you so much for this. Very happy that Hugh has been able now to connect with us. Can you hear us, Hugh?
I can hear you loud and clear, Christoph. Apologies, I'm speaking from the third world in Europe, where connections are not so good.
Okay, but now I think it's perfectly fine. So great to have you with us, Hugh. And, I think what we're looking at now is, clearly there is an offer for ESG investing in the ASEAN region. But, for this to work, you also need to have a market. You need to have a demand. And it would be quite interesting, with your group being one powerhouse, but increasingly focusing on ESG investing, to have your assessment of what the demand is like, the market is like in the ASEAN member states? What can you share with us from that perspective?
Yes, I think the simple answer to that is that demand from ASEAN for ESG is growing. But to put it in context, we've been investing in ASEAN since the mid-80s, and we're long-term fundamental investors. We started investing in equities, and of course since then have branched out into fixed income, real estate, multi-assets, so the whole range of investments. But from our real roots as a fundamental long-term equity investor, for us issues like ESG have been of great importance from day one. Because if you look long-term and invest in poorly governed companies who abuse the environment and have no respect for society, you don't make money. So it's been a very simple, if you like, thesis that investing with good people trying to do the right things in their respective businesses is an absolute prerequisite to make money. Now, of course, the way we've expressed that over the years has changed. So when I first started investing in ASEAN in '85, we wouldn't have talked about ESG. There was ethical investing, maybe back in those days, and the whole language has evolved. And as we've seen from Xu Yin, and how we've seen it happen within our business of demand and more focus on ESG, I think clearly it's come from Europe, I would say, first. So the big institutions and the clients of ours who bring their money for us to investing into Asia, have been at the forefront of this. So it sat very well with us, because this is something we've believed in from day one. But we've seen the big drive from European institutions, I would say led by the Dutch. The Scandinavians have been right at the forefront of promoting ESG investment, excluding certain industries. It's been slow in ASEAN, so from ASEAN demand itself for ESG is a long way behind, but growing rapidly. So we do see the issuance of green bonds in ASEAN, for example, doubling in 2019 from what it was in 2018. We see certain institutions really embracing ESG. And I think of some of the leading Malaysian institutions, EPF, Khazanah, for example. So it's very much on the agenda. ASEAN is catching up. And of course, there's, as there is in everywhere in the world, the generation certainly below me, the next generation after me, issues such as the environment figure very highly. So I think clearly we've reached tipping point. And ESG is being embedded in most people's portfolios without necessarily having the label ESG right up front. But what we're seeing from our institutional demand and indeed our demand from the banks, the insurance companies in ASEAN, is that everyone is now expecting ESG to be involved in portfolio construction. So it's happening, which is a great thing.
It's good that it's happening. Here you reminded us as well. I mean, there was a time where ESG didn't exist at all, and the fact that we're now having this session, this discussion at such an event, and the trend that you're describing is a sea change But you also reminded us that, in ASEAN there is a catching up effect, there is a whole potential that is not being harnessed. And that actually led us to believe that there may be some constraint, there may be a number of things that stand in the way. And, and to talk about this, I'm very happy to turn to Ibu Shinta Kamdani. Great to have you, Ibu Shinta. And from your experience, I think not only in Indonesia, but also you've been traveling and visiting many other countries of ASEAN. What would you say are the main obstacles that still, need to be overcome for ESG investing to reach its full potential? What needs to be done? Ibu Shinta, over to you.
Thank you, Christoph, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel. I want to start with the Indonesian context first. I think advancing sustainability and mobilizing sustainable financing is not a new term within Indonesia ecosystem. There have been numerous milestones over the years. In fact, it has been embedded into Indonesian national plan. And it also has established its transparency through the government reporting of Indonesia SDG roadmap that has been published by our Ministry of National Development Planning. So Indonesia is very clear, we have been advancing. Moreover, the sustainable financing side also has been pursued for years. I think December 2014, when our financial authority has published what we call a roadmap for sustainable financing in Asia. It lays out many of our agenda development framework, and we also set up a standard 3 years later. We set up standard for green bond issuance in the country the first time, and last year it has appointed 8 banks to start channeling loan based on the principle of sustainable financing. However, with having said that, there are still numerous challenges, and I'm sure this is not just happening in Indonesia, but many parts of ASEAN as well. So part of the challenges is mobilizing the private sector resources in ESG investment itself. I think in regulatory and policy context, there are many countries that still have many overlapping regulations between ministries. In Indonesia, between central government and local government. Moreover, the large capital or capital intensive are required, while the investor have to deal with a lot of these complicated administrative requirements. So regulatory administration is also a very big part of it. Now, on the institutional and organizational level, there still remains a gap on the demand level of investable projects, enterprises, or infrastructure. So even through the government, even though the government has issued like green bonds or green sukuk, we call it, the challenge still exists due to limited bankable and investable pipeline. This is not to the extent of the sustainable project or the demand side. On the supply side also, there has been a lack of knowledge of ESG investing across the corporate boards and government. So in addition, heightened prices due to COVID, as you know, many enterprises have also pushed towards short-term returns and deprioritize some of the sustainability perspectives. So we really need to refocus ourselves and to use the COVID as a transformation and momentum, continue focusing on ESG. Also, another aspect that I would like to mention is the ESG standardization. I think for corporate reporting and transparency, as well as limited level of organizational knowledge and short-term thinking of corporate governance, have been backtracking some of the progress of ESG investing in the region. Now, I wanted to mention that, of course, government also play a very big role. I wanted to say that Indonesian government has actually recently launched our omnibus law for structural reform. And I think this really the focus objective of creation of jobs. We are removing many of the heavy restriction on investment, and it can help attract more investors, create more jobs, and help Indonesia to build resilience of economic recovery. However, the cross collective action, I think, will be more than important to ensure this inclusive and sustainable implementation of the regulation. Even though on the bright side, the investing process will be much easier, the collective effort between the development agencies also, such as UNDP, is crucial to shift investor perspective to align investment portfolio into the ESG practices. Finally, I have to mention that the private sector practices, in particular on the non-financial industry, has been taken forward and needs to be rewarded. So private sectors as the economic action and actor of the innovation need to be directed from wasteful models of operation and investment toward a more linear or sustainable economy. And this means the government as policymaking need to reconsider more effective legal frameworks, subsidy, needed infrastructure and tax incentive to create an enabling environment for scaling up private sector efforts and investment opportunities. So this is, I think, some of the issues and some of the, I would say, ideas and recommendations that we need to do moving forward.
Thank you so much, Ibu Shinta. Very clearly articulated these issues need to be tackled, and at the same time, when listening to you about some of the decisions made by the Indonesian government, I was just recalling what the Prime Minister of Malaysia was telling us about the importance of policy and regulatory frameworks. And I believe in ASEAN, other countries, we also have example of government taking steps. But then, as you rightly underlined, there is a need at the very practical level to have bankable projects. To build these pipelines, and that's also where UNDP, and we have very good example in Indonesia, where UNDP works with a number of investors and the government to try to help build this pipeline. Now, talking about the constraint, I'd like to look into to some of the things that Kun Wichen was mentioning earlier. Kun Wichen, you were emphasizing the G dimension. And we know that in addition to your CEO responsibility, you're also the chair of anti-corruption organization Thailand. Kun Wichen, if I may ask, how do you see corruption and this, in this G dimension, and how much of an obstacle would that be in harnessing the potential of ESG investing?
Yes, it's a big challenge for us. As you know, the status of corruption is not so favorable here in Thailand. That is why we need to, to get ourselves involved. Of course, the government included, but private sector, civil society all needs to get involved and try to resolve this big issue. First, creating the awareness. Corruption is not just the under table matter. It's we all know it's transparency, it's conflict of interest, and it's inefficient use of resources and all, which affects the environment and all the various social challenges that we are facing. In order for us to tackle this big issue, with, of course, the objective to hopefully overcome this issue in certain foreseeable future, there's a need for us to bring people together. Collaboration is very important. General public must be aware. General public must demand transparency and reduce and less corruption and eliminating corruption. So bringing people together with various means is important. Business must get involved, government must get involved, policy, advocacies, efforts need to be done. So creating awareness, educating people, preventing mechanisms, the various platforms to bring people together so they can help us monitor and prevent corrupting acts and all. And of course, when there are wrongdoings, people must raise their voice. Whistleblowing mechanism must be in place. So all these need to be done. with various collaboration, because it's a huge effort. It's a big challenge still. I think we have made some reasonable progress in terms of awareness. People are more and more willing to get themselves involved, see the importance of the effect of this dimension of ESG that affects our livelihood in terms of the environment and the social challenges.
Excellent. Thank you for a very open answer, Kun Wichen. Before we close this session, I think we could still flash the QR for the Q&A, and then we will collect. Can this be done? And while we're doing that, just let me ask the other panelists: do you have any additional thought or any specific comments that you would make on the point that was basically that were presented by the four of you? All right. So if no more additional points on this, I think we already, with your four contributions, we have covered a good ground of this first topic, and it would be now good to do the same for the second topic, which.
Maybe start with Shinta.
Sorry.
We haven't started with Shinta yet.
Yes.
Yes, please.
So now on the technology, we like to do the same, and I think technology is very much talked about, partly about COVID-19, but it's not only a matter of talking. And then we have to see what is a real potential for technology. It goes beyond organizing video meetings. It goes as far as promoting leapfrog in telemedicine, teleeducation. It's also a new way of doing business, I believe, with digitalization. But we need actually to be concrete, and I hope that's what we can achieve with this session. And turning first to Shu Yin, I mean, clearly, your company is investing in new technology, but what are the technology that could really have the potential of being game changers? The one that could make the world and the business world and the society very different. From your experience already gained, what would you identify as the game changers?
Thank you. I do hope my sound quality is a little better now. I've been having some technical issues. I think to talk about tech transformation, I mean, so for us at Panama, we are very excited about the tech transformation occurring across ASEAN. But we're also very conscious about how this meets the real world and the typical mass market consumer. So it's very easy to talk about, technology and transforming retail, for example. But what does this look like for the mom and pop stores and the MSMEs that I mentioned earlier? So we don't invest in companies actually for the sake of buzzwords such as AI or machine learning, but how these technologies can be applied to solve real-world problems with a deep understanding of customer needs and service. We have some great examples of this within our portfolio. So, for example, we've invested in an e-commerce platform called Mapan that leverages a network of agents, now numbering 270,000 agents, to provide life essential goods for approximately 3 million customers in the. Now, the really interesting thing is that this e-commerce platform started off not with a desire to do e-commerce per se, but rather with a deep understanding of what their customers, predominantly women in rural and semi-rural areas, were looking for. So these were items like high-quality pants, hair dryers, school uniforms, and so on. Now, if this sounds like just a nice story about pants and not really about business, I'd like to mention again that this network now reaches 3 million customers. And when this company exited to Gojek in 2017, this represented one of the most successful exits for any impact business so far in Southeast Asia. So certainly smartphones and digital tools were a powerful enabler to business success, but we believe the key success factor really understanding an underserved customer well, women living in rural areas in Indonesia. We've also invested in Clinica, and that is the largest virtual pharmacy network in ASEAN. It connects over 170,000 professionals from 40,000 pharmacies, provides better healthcare to over 100 million. Now, as I think most of you would be aware, pharmacists in these markets not chains like Watsons or CVS, but they're typically independently run mom-and-pop style pharmacies. By empowering these pharmacies to be center of care for their communities and bringing them onto a common mobile platform, Clinica helps patients access more affordable medicines, leads to improved patient adherence, and also helps small pharmacies improve their sales. In addition, by gathering last-mile data from these pharmacies at unprecedented scale, this platform generates unparalleled insights for like ministries of health, global health researchers, as well as NGOs. And yes, this is definitely an application of data, right? But it began with creating an intuitive, practical app which helps ordinary pharmacists get better access to information, take continuing education, and restock their pharmacies in an easy fashion. So both of these companies, which I've described, are using EdTech, but it is grounded in a focus of serving customers, particularly the needs of traditionally underserved groups. And it is critical that we don't forget who we're designing these technologies for, and what are the potential applications beyond serving urban, digitally savvy populations. I think this is critical if we're going to achieve our impact. Thank you. Back to you, Christophe.
Thank you very much, Shuyin, and thanks so much for showing that technology is not only for high-tech people, for big groups. There is so much to be actually done in terms of connection. Rural populations, women entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, and I think that's also something that we're seeing now with the COVID-19 time and the power of the technology for these groups. And also the various platform and the connection, including with social impact investment, that is extremely, extremely powerful. So thank you so much. I'd like now to go back to Kun Wichin. Kun Wichin, as we saw in the COVID-19 time, there has been very strong emphasis placed on data, but also data privacy, open data, transparency. So all this linking to the G, but also the social dimension of investing. What is your view on this, on open data, on this new data-related technology, and how can this really help ESG investing? Kun Wichin, over to you, please.
Yes, thank you. Digital technology, of course, very important enabler of how we can move forward in creating better ecosystem for ESG going forward. First of all, I'd like to mention that we see the roles of now specific certain SMEs who are technology focused, startups, and of course big corporation in terms of providing infrastructure. So combining efforts in terms of development, innovation, new initiatives of these various players constitute what we see happening here in Thailand. For some examples are very clear in terms of our tackling the pandemic issues, the ability to trace, to track movement of millions of people relies on these new technologies, and it's been developed in a very quick and efficient manner, and we're now all using these technologies. In terms of education, I think digital technology will help us leapfrog in terms of accessibility to all, in terms of normalizing inequality in education, in traceability of the use of our supplies and resources, natural resources, very important. But in terms of improvement of the governance systems, we're talking about all these, big data. Big data is very important. Being better informed allow us to come up with more targeted strategies and action. I'd like to cite an example of an initiative that is now ongoing called Anti-Corruption Thailand, ACT-AI, which is a platform that brings in all government procurement data into this platform. With all the updates, it brings in information on the procuring sides, supply side, who the players are and all that, into this big platform. And of course, with the analytics that we're using, people can access all these procurement projects and help us monitor, give us input and all that in order to ensure transparency and prevent any, corruptions that could happen. So this is a very important tool that is based on information technology, management of big data, down to analytics and AI. So it's a very tangible tool besides the others that I've already mentioned.
Thank you very much.
If I could say just one more word.
Yes.
It allows us to engage the general public, all stakeholders, to play their part.
Very important last point, which echoes the one made by the Prime Minister of Malaysia about inclusion. I think with you, Kun Wichen, and then with Shuin, we've really covered the S, the social and governance dimension, but we also need to talk about the E, the environment dimension, and then E can also means energy. So to do this, I like to turn to Ibu Shinta, because I think, and I know Ibu Shinta, you have a lot of experience and interest also in the issue of renewable energy, which is a very important dimension of the transition of Indonesia's development toward the sustainable path, and probably also for some other countries in ASEAN. So what are your views, Ibu Shinta, on technology for renewable energy? I think it will be of interest to all of us.
I think I've been talking about energy transition in Indonesia for quite some time, and we know we're still face a lot of challenges, but I do want to share some of the what's happening here in Indonesia. First, I want to share on the enormous potentials of the renewable energy itself. I think the country has potential to generate about 788,000 megawatts of power. And this comes from wind, solar, tidal, even geothermal. This is more than 14 times the country's current electricity consumption. So we are also located along the equator and on top of a ring of active volcanoes, as you know. So Indonesia has about 40% of the world geothermal energy stores, enough for 29,000 megawatts of energy, and its huge maritime area could provide about 75,000 megawatts of power through projects such as Larantuka Strait tidal bridge. So this is the scale. I just want to mention the scale that potential that we have at the moment in Indonesia. So the Strait tidal bridge that I mentioned is about $550 million sustainable water project, and it will power about 250,000 homes in East Flores. So we're all very excited about this project. Now, Indonesia has been trying this energy transition. So the focus from fossil, as you know, we've been very much fossil fuel based, and we've been trying to now transition to 50% still on coal, but 25% gas and 25% renewable. So we have a target that in 2025 we want to at least target 23%. Now this is where the problem start arising. that within the context right now, we have subsidized fossil fuel. So with that, it would be very, very difficult for some of this project tariff to be able to be feasible. So that's why government needs to of course do something. And I just wanted to share that during the COVID pandemic, actually, it becomes more compelling momentum for Indonesia to accelerate this energy transition into low carbon energy. I think a huge development has commenced this year. The Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources just issued actually new regulations that expected to overcome several of these regulatory obstacles that relate to the renewable energy power plant and make investment more attractive. One of the most important change that I would like to address is the elimination of the build, own, operate, transfer. This has been a scheme that I think is important because for renewable energy plants, some of it with high also investment, IPP now can own many of the project assets and do not have to transfer its asset at the end of the project to the electricity company or PLN. So this will help some of the renewable energy players or investors that would like to do this. In addition, I think the solar industry also has in the post-COVID-19 green recovery plan through tax incentive and also other stimulus measures such as deferment of loan installment, lower increase rate for renewable energy project, adjustment to procurement terms, and many others that would like to support the growth of this. Also, I would like to say that I think right now there are also some continuous reform that needs to be encouraged to improve the investment climate itself for renewable energy. So from reducing the tariff that I mentioned before, of pricing barriers, I think provided more financial incentive, and also enabling the public-private partnership into the energy research and development. So promote more affordable renewable energy projects as well as a set standard of energy efficiency. I think this is very important. On the other side of the spectrum, I think the private sector has also continuously participating in increasing renewable energy consumption, as well as bringing more innovative energy solutions to the market. And I just want to give example. We are actually also one of the world's largest producers of garbage, which include plastic waste. It has also opened big opportunity for investors and the private sector to embark into the waste energy project. So right now we have about 12 cities in Indonesia potential projects that will develop. And it will need a sustainable supply of waste with certain characteristics. So technology also play an important role. And we are actually welcoming many technology other countries also to partner with us to support us in this circular initiative. As you know, when we talk about the technology, we also need to bring more of the employment opportunity and green jobs. I think let's talk about green jobs because I think that's also very, very key when we talk about technology. Now, I just want to mention in the startup technology landscape, there has been also numerous series of recent investment in clean tech startups such as smart grid, energy efficiency, energy management, energy access, energy storage that are mainly operated to fill out the significant demand for electricity in remote and more rural areas that are affordable and accessible. So looking in the broader sense, I believe that I think Indonesia and is offering many enormous opportunity for renewable energy projects to flourish. And I hope with some of the support from the government, or whether that's regulation, incentive, and so forth, along with also the opportunity of the digital economy, that Indonesia can really bring forward the renewable energy generation project perform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Shinta, for taking us into the Indonesian energy landscape. And also, from what you're saying, it's very clear that COVID-19 recovery is not only about resuming economic growth. It's not only about bringing back investments. It's also having something that is not business as usual, as Kun Wichen was saying in the very beginning, but something that is actually a green recovery, and that opens opportunity for use of technology, for green energy, for green jobs, as you described. And that's something UNDP is very engaged with its partner in Indonesia, as you know, and in many other countries. Thank you again, Ibu Shinta. Let me now turn to you. When you hear about renewable energy as an investor, what is your reaction? And when you think about investment, maybe not all sectors, not all industries are equal when it comes to technology. So what would be the one that you would see as having the biggest potential?
Well, for us, we really see this going across businesses. I mean, as you correctly say, Christoph, it's some are very pure, 100% potential in renewable energies and so on. But the important thing for us is that we see technologies being employed across some very traditional businesses that are helping the environment, helping governance, helping society. And still some of, and I guess what we would call still some of the old technologies, if you like, mobile telephony that we've been discussing before is one of the most important of these, really democratizing society, helping governance, helping the environment, helping deprived parts of communities by giving them access. So our look is both from the absolute pure end of, yes, this is a brand new technology, whether it be solar panels or whatever it happens to be, renewable energy, wind, areas like that. But I think importantly to us, and this is something you referred to earlier, how the aspects of growth change. When I was first visited Asia in the 80s, it was just growth. Let's all go for growth, where the tiger economy is growing 7-8%. I think the fundamental change we're seeing now, and it's accelerated by COVID, is quality of growth. Not just growth itself, but quality of growth. And this means things like having your children grow up and are able to breathe fresh air, having access to clean water, proper education, issues like that. So this is running across all businesses. Yes, of course, we're looking for some very exciting businesses that benefit purely from that and 100% from a new technology. But I think what excites me more as an investor is how old businesses are developing. So you have property companies building green buildings, cement companies trying to do everything to improve their emissions, their energy efficiency, and so on. And I think this is what's probably the most exciting thing in a funny sense that goes on. It doesn't get the headlines. So in some senses it's not as attractive from a headline point of view as some of the pure new solar panel type things. But I think the importance to us as a society is that these are huge businesses that touch us all, and they are changing. They are embracing change. Are they doing it fast enough? The answer is always no. It is never fast enough, and that's why we all need to keep up the pressure that we're doing here today.
Thank you. That's a very good way of ending your intervention. We'll try and keep the pressure, but thanks again for reinforcing this point. It's not only about growth, and that what UNDP very strongly believes. But I was very happy to see the member of the panel nodding, and I hope we have the same level of adhesion in the audience, physically or online. Before we wrap up this kind of two discussion, we had two questions, and I'd like to thank those who actually share this question. And the first one, which is to all of you, is about young entrepreneur and the youth more broadly. We know that in many of the ASEAN countries, small and medium-scale enterprise are really the backbone of employment creation and of innovation very often. And the youth and the young entrepreneurs actually play an active part. As we've seen, and UNDP did a number of surveys, assessment, they're actually become very vulnerable to the economic contraction from COVID-19, but they still have a potential. So what can we do to actually make sure that the young entrepreneurs are better connected to ESG investing, that they also play their role, that they're informed? What ideas could you share with us? And the floor is open to any of you. Who would like to go first?
Okay, I can go first.
Thank you.
I think it's well, first of all, welcoming comments or question that comes in. I think the younger generation, of course, has much longer stake into the future than people like a baby boomer like myself. Okay, and they are concerned because of the wake up call, and they have been concerned, and they're better informed because of the efficiency of our online communications and on all that now, and I see I've been seeing the interest on the part of these younger generations to play their parts, not just demanding, not just sitting back as spectators. They want to play their parts. And of course, there are so many things that they can do. And many of them, of course, are playing their part in terms of utilizing the digital technologies in mitigating or ensuring better or our ability to make our life more sustainable going to the future. So a lot of emphasis should be put, and we should help and empower these younger generations to play their role, because I think that many of them are already ready to play a part.
Thank you very much, Kuwich. And Ibu Shinta, I see you, coming close to the camera. What do you, in one sentence, what do you tell to the young investors of Indonesia, including women business leaders?
Christoph, I'm excited to see that actually many of the young entrepreneurs in Indonesia is actually very much aware of this. And we've been supporting the startups space for quite some time. And I've seen more and more actually what we call startup that have impact, including, investing in SDGs. So actually startup is actually doing this. Now, what we need to do is to help them with the right ecosystem, right? Because for them to be able to grow, I mean, they have the ideas, but they need to be supported. And this is where I think also collaboration with big companies. I think right now we are encouraging many companies to also include, some of the startups in part, not just in their supply chain, but also sharing with them the importance of this ESG investing as well. So making them included in the arena is very, very important. They are future generation, but we need to give them to facilitate them. What I mean is they can't you can't leave them and let them grow on their own. So we need, and I think government also need to pay much attention to this. We know that, SME also is in Indonesia is 90% of our backbone economy. And, but needs to be really be the ecosystem and the right path of how to incentivize also a lot of these young entrepreneurs with bright ideas needs to be there. And the key also for me is funding. So that's why we've been very much supporting impact investing, especially for young entrepreneurs. As you know, we work together, Christoph, UNDP to launch our Indonesia Impact Fund. I think this is very important because the startups are there. They have the potential, definitely, but we need to nurture them so that they can start developing their businesses. Thank you.
Very true, Ibu Shinta. Thank you so much. Second question is actually specifically addressed to Shunyin. So, Shunyin, let me just read it very quickly. How should the various global and national level ESG assessment tools and standards be introduced to MSMEs in developing countries? And the role of international organizations, possibly like UNDP. What would you say?
Right. Thank you. It's a great question because one of the concerns that I do often hear about impact measurement and ESG assessment is that it's a lot of work, right? Or we don't have the resources to do this. There's a fear that there'll be a 200-page checklist or report that companies need to fill in, and which for small companies, this is obviously not feasible. So for us, what we're focused on as we, measure and manage impact is how do we do this in a way which adds value to business and is manageable for the business itself, right? So when we work with smaller size businesses, as we often do, we focus on a number of key metrics grounded in international standards such as IRIS+, which I mentioned before. And this key number of metrics, it could just be 5 to 10. These metrics are the key bellwethers of impact performance, right? And they're also often drivers of business performance. So, for example, we could look at metrics associated with education outcomes, right? This is important not just as an impact driver, but also as a business driver, right? If your courses are not delivering results, then your customers will likely turn to a different product. And, I think, so making it very accessible and accessible for the companies that we work with, I would say, is how we've made it accessible even for small and medium enterprises that we work with. And I think certainly, that's what like I've noted as a part of the impact management project are very key to driving.
Thank you, Shuyin. A very good response to a very good question. And with this, we're going to close these two discussions. And I would now like to call on the imagination of our four panel members and ask them to travel in time, projecting themselves, to be in 2050, and look back at this current year, which is the year of the Great Disruption, and try to see what has been the major change, what really has made the world different after the year of Great Disruption. And it's really meant to be a discussion among the four of you. So let me first ask you, Hugh, what is your travel recollection when we are in 2050, and then I'll ask the other to comment on your imagination. Hugh, over to you.
Yes, to look forward to 2050. Well, I hope I'll be here, but I'm afraid I'm one of the baby boomers as well. So really, I've looked to my children, and I have children in their teens and 20s, and they are the people who'll be driving what things are like in 2050. And when I talk to them, I find they're so different from what I was in my teens and early 20s. I mean, their concern about issues, I would say particularly the environment, is right up there. So I see the generation that will be driving what we are in the 50s, in 30 years' time. I think we'll continue a lot of the good things that, I like to think we've started as a generation. We started a bit late, I'm afraid to say, but at least we've started, at least we've reached a tipping point. And when I look to the generation that will be driving us in 30 years' time, that will be in the position we're in now, I don't see that stopping. So I think that's a huge positive. And of course, by then we should in theory, have a lot of solar power, a lot of wind power, electric vehicles and the like. And the perennial issue, of course, will be good governance. But hopefully things like big data and the like, and strong governments and strong legislation will enable that to be smooth as well. But I'm afraid human nature is such, it's never going to be smooth. So I think the teenagers and the people in their 20s today will still have to work hard. They're not going to be able to sit back and just enjoy the fruits of everything being smooth. There are always going to be new challenges.
Thank you very much. Ibu Shinta, what's your imagination? You just described a world with a lot of solar panel, wind power, and electric vehicle, and the different, generation. What would you say? You're muted. No, we can't hear you, Shinta. Yeah.
I'm not muted.
Go ahead. Yes, now it's good. Now it's good.
Now it's good? Okay. Christoph, one thing that I always think about is the education. So we've talked about technology, but actually the basis is education. I think education for me is a way to transform the world for better and more resilient. We can't talk about other things without the future, without the education. And I think there has been, I would say, a limited presence of sustainability and climate change, maybe study across school and university as we enter the decade of action toward ESG. The great reset toward the future. And if I said in 2050, I would have hope that this is the great reset, is toward future education, to create change makers that are ready for the next pandemic challenges. So I'm hoping that during this time, our countries are already thinking about this. I think beyond traditional capitalism, future business leaders, global leaders need to embrace conscious capitalism that demonstrate humanities, diversity, environmental restoration, and fostering global sustainability leadership as driver for success. So rather than focusing only on competition that could bring resource exploitation, future generation should focus on building cooperation, innovation, and long-term prosperity that I think proclaim the virtue of this diversity, inclusivity, and environmental protection. So I'm hoping in 2050, when I sit there and go back, that during this time, actually many countries are starting to look into this, the education for sustainable development. And it's really, to me, it's the basic. And I hope in 2050, I can dream that at that time, this actually happened during this time for transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Shinta. Very inspirational, as always. Kun Wichen, if we look at the Kingdom of Thailand in 2050, what it will be like?
Of course, we would like to see that our children mine and all the children who by that time grow up and they will have their children of their own will not be left with the burdens that we're facing today, because they will need to play their parts, and that whatever environment is at that point, and hopefully it will be much more, sustainable. The view, the light at the end of the tunnel of sustainable society is much clearer today. So it would be wrong if in the future the burden is still left with them or even get worsened. So what we need today is to make it, you mentioned about, tipping point. We need to make that happen today. The change of mindsets have to happen today. The role of citizens, we need many more, and citizens must become active citizens, take matters in their own hand. They all need to play their parts. Corporate citizenship, observing ESG is very important. So in the year, by the year 2050, I would hope that, the next generation will be facing with a task that will be further enhanced, better livelihood, but not left with the situations that we're facing today and the various adverse trends that we're seeing today. So tipping point that you mentioned, the big change of mindsets must happen now.
Thank you very much, Wichen. Shuyin, you were listening with great attention to the description, imagination of your three fellow members. What would you like to tell them now?
Well, I think it's interesting how we have many similar themes, right? I think none of us was really naming a particular technology or digital trend, but really a change in, our humanity, right? And the way that our mindset. And I think for me as well, one of the really powerful things about COVID-19 is that we realized that we're all in this together in many ways, right? That we are connected. And in other instances of people, whether they are natural disasters or conflicts, often the impact is insulated to a particular geographic area or group of people. But I think as we've all seen, this pandemic has affected almost all of us. And definitely to different degrees, but I think in various ways we were all affected. And this highlighted our connectedness and also that our socioeconomic system and our markets as well are only as robust as the most vulnerable in the chain. And what I hope this new sense of connectedness brings is really the will to act, right? And I think, Vivian has also made this point very forcefully. What we've lacked up to date anyway, not the tools or the technologies or the data, but willpower. And, I think what the pandemic has brought is a renewed sense of urgency to address these social and environmental problems that are facing. And I'm very encouraged by which shows that the vast majority, 70% of impact investors expect to maintain and in many cases expand their portfolio response to COVID-19. Development finance institutions and private investors have engaged bold and innovative ways to deploy capital during this time through various relief and resilience facilities. And I think, as Hugh mentioned earlier, social bond issuances have increased dramatically, 350% year to date. And so what I hope for is a transformation of our will, right, our collective, and a recognition that now is the time to act. I would use the words, tipping point, right? I really hope this is a tipping point for ESG and impact investing, so that we can mobilize the trillions of dollars required to close the current SDG financing gaps that we face.
Thank you so much, great Shuyin. With this, I will now have to bring you back to 2020 to conclude the session. I would not do justice to the panelists and the value of their contributions if I were to try to summarize it, but I'm sure the organizer will undertake to do this. So let me just thank every one of them. You in Europe, Ibu Shinta from Jakarta, Indonesia, Kun Wichen from Thailand, and Shuyin from Panama capital. Let me thank you very much for everything you've shared, and I think you've really complemented each other very well. So thanks to your contribution, we've really, I feel, covered the ground and really met the objective of this session. And on a personal level, let me thank you also for having, very much facilitated my role as a moderator. I really, really appreciate that. I would very much like also to thank the organizers, VCCI Vietnam, a long-standing partner of UNDP, as I remember from my years in Hanoi, the excellent office of UNDP in Vietnam, also my colleague from the Bangkok regional hub of UNDP, Nick Booth and other, and also the Fairbies regional hub, and the government of the United Kingdom and the UK Prosperity Fund for their support to the Prosperity Fund, through which UNDP is working on this issue in the ASEAN countries. As a closing note, I would like to thank all of you who have actually been following this session, whether you were in Hanoi, Vietnam, or wherever you were through the video connection. Thank you very much, and with this, I give the floor back to Mr. Thuy Vuong. Thank you, bye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Balway, and all of our speakers for joining. That also includes, ladies and gentlemen, our morning session. We would now like to invite, for all of those who are here in Hanoi, to a networking luncheon at the restaurant Promenade on the first floor of the Daewoo Hotel. For everyone joining online, please take a break as well and enjoy your break. We would like to ask you to re-log in at 14 o'clock Hanoi time, GMT +7, to begin our discussion on technology and the future of work. Again, we would like for everyone to return here at 14 o'clock Hanoi time, GMT +7, to begin our discussion on technology and the future of work. Thank you very much.